and welcome back to yet another episode of Ball with Y'all. Today is May 4th, and we are well on our way into the summer months. So I guess we're only a few weeks away from summer at this point in time, but I basically feel like summer's begun now that we are in the month of May. Of course, it's been 2 weeks since we last spoke, I guess late April, right? We took a little bit of a 2-week break there as part of our new backdrop here, our new studio. So glad to welcome you to our new studio down here in South Florida. A lot of new things are happening over the coming weeks and coming months, as I alluded to, I guess 2 weeks ago, when I mentioned that we will be taking a bit of a break here after the month of May to sort through our Season 3, which will begin in late August as well. So a lot of exciting things happening here for Ball with Y'all. Thank you for tuning in today, whether that's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Breaker, YouTube at BWI Productions, any other platform that I may or may not have mentioned that you somehow found us on. I appreciate it, and so glad you chose to join us today, and hopefully you'll check out some of our past episodes as well. Now, I always say it, but I'm going to say it again. We have a full episode like we always do. Of course, just 2 days ago, at this point in time, Chase Elliott won his first race of the NASCAR Sprint Cup, or is it just the Cup, I guess at this point? NASCAR Cup Series of 2022. His first win on an oval since 2020, November 2020 at Phoenix and Martinsville respectively. So, massive moment there. Suffice to say, I was very excited, so we'll get into some of that. Talk about what all that means moving forward. Then we'll, of course, talk about what we saw this past week in the NFL draft. The NFL draft went from Thursday to Saturday this past weekend. A lot to dissect there. A big weekend if you are an SEC fan, so we'll get into some of that. And then lastly, I have not talked about it to this point, but I will get into the NBA playoffs now that we are currently in the second round, almost about to get into the semis before we get into the NBA finals. So, preview some of that. Of course, I know we've already had some games already unfold with the Boston Celtics and Milwaukee Bucks facing off, I guess, Sunday. So, a lot of moving parts there, but I'll give you a little bit of my thoughts, thoughts that don't really matter a whole lot given the fact that I don't watch too much basketball, but hey, we hit the mark with March Madness, so who knows how this thing could go. With that being said, let's get into story number 1. On Sunday, I was so excited. I had a feeling. I had a really good feeling. I thought, you know what? Chase could do it. Chase could win this week. He was starting, I believe, 4th on Sunday, right alongside Kyle Larson, behind Denny Hamlin and Chris Buescher on that front line. I had a good feeling. Fast car in practice, fast car in qualifying. They didn't spin out like half the field did during practice and qualifying. So I had a pretty good feeling, right? Last year, Hendrick Motorsports, they went 1, 2, 3, 4, of course, in that one race at Dover where Alex Bowman ended up winning the race. And suffice to say, the Monster Mile did not disappoint this time around either. Now, of course, the race did get pushed back to Monday due to rain, which was unfortunate to say the least, but we make do with what we got, right? You knew Hendrick was going to do well. You thought Gibbs could do well. We talked about Hamlin starting up at the front, and he did really well for a long time, actually, on Monday. He ran up toward the front. I believe he won Stage 2, and then toward the end of Stage 2, he proceeded to his front tire changer, didn't get his lug nut on quite too well, and he drove off, and his tire beat him to the line, which is frowned upon. And, of course, it's an uncontrolled tire. You lose your track position, and then on top of that, he now has lost his crew chief, his tire changer, I believe his front left tire changer, and his jackman for the next 4 races, which includes Darlington, of course, Kansas, the All-Star race, and Charlotte. So a big blow there for the Hamlin team, a pit team that's been doing really well as of late. I believe they've been at the top of the league, if not toward the top of the league in pit times and so on. So a really unfortunate result for them, especially given the track position they had and the pace that they had throughout the day. On top of that, you saw Larson. He looked really good, of course. He starting alongside Chase Elliott on that second row. He looked really good. Won Stage 1, I believe, or started at the front of Stage 1. I forget how that worked out. But he was leading at the end of the rain delay, or when the rain delay, I guess, began on Sunday. And Larson looked good, of course. Then he spun and blew a couple tires, which was unfortunate for those of you who support Kyle Larson. But blown tires were a repeated theme throughout the day. It wasn't just Larson. Reddick, he spun out at one point in time. We talked about all the situations in practice with Byron spinning out, and I forget who all spun out, but there were a number of guys. I'm pretty sure Reddick spun out in practice too. A number of guys who just pushed a little too hard and either blew a tire or spun out or both, right? A repeated theme throughout the weekend, and it was really interesting to see how these cars responded to those situations. Now, as far as Chase Elliott goes, now we know I am a Chase Elliott fan. We know that I was ecstatic when I saw that result go final Monday afternoon. When I saw the Twitter, because of course I was in a meeting when Chase won the race, which is so fitting, right? But I was ecstatic to go through Twitter and see Chase Elliott wins at Dover. It was remarkable. I didn't know how to react, right? And I'm beginning to wonder if I'm ever going to see Chase win a full race. And I say that, of course, I started watching NASCAR regularly in the spring of 2021. And Chase's the 3 races he's won since were at the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas, where, of course, you guys recall, we talked about it before, rain-shortened race, which had a number of issues in and of itself, but the rain-shortened race probably would not have won had it not been a rain-shortened race, but nonetheless, a rain-shortened race. And then, 4th of July at Road America, I was not watching because it was the 4th of July. And he won there. And then, lastly, this past Monday, where I, of course, much like most of corporate America, was working while the race was taking place. So, I'm beginning to wonder if I'm ever going to see a full Chase Elliott win. Now, of course, this is where the modern invention of the DVR works out in my favor. But nonetheless, I would tend to like to see the full race from start to finish, if possible. Now, of course, I loved this win. I think it's a big win. I think it keeps the pace with his Hendrick teammates, with Bowman and Byron and Larson. Of course, they had all had more than one win since he last won. With Byron winning twice this year, Bowman winning once this year and multiple times last year. Larson, of course, winning basically every race last year as well. This was a massive win for him. Of course, the first oval win that he had in like a year and a half, like I mentioned, with Martinsville and Phoenix en route to his championship run in 2020. And on the bright side, he still has the points lead as well. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I think this could make him the title frontrunner. Right alongside, not frontrunner, make him a frontrunner, if you will. Right alongside Ross Chastain, right alongside William Byron. These folks who have been consistent all year long. And here we are, Chase Elliott has been consistent all year long, and now he has a win to his name. And now we know he's virtually locked into the playoffs. So, pretty strong position here if you are a Chase Elliott supporter. And honestly, I think he's in a really good position for the playoffs come August, September, October, November. It's a really good position for Chase at this point in time. Some other observations that I kind of made during this race. Has anyone heard from Kevin Harvick? Have you heard from Kevin Harvick? Have you seen him, right? I think I actually saw his picture on the back of one of those milk cartons, the cannot find, please contact if you know any information kind of thing. I have not seen Kevin Harvick anywhere. He's been a non-factor basically all year. I know he did well at Phoenix 2 months ago, but lost to his teammate in the form of Chase Briscoe. I feel like I'm waiting for something. I feel like I'm waiting for him to actually become relevant. And of course, he didn't win it all last year, right? He has not won to this point this year. And I know he's up there in age, right? And I know he's about to retire. But still, there has to be some sort of expectation when a guy on your team like Chase Briscoe has won, right? Now, of course, the flip side of it is Cole Custer has not won, right? Eric Almirola has not won since New Hampshire last year, I think. So there's some margin for error, if you will. But when you're being held, when other guys are being held to this certain standard, and Kevin Harvick is not being held to that standard, I think it raises some questions as to what we are looking at and where his team and particularly himself are going. Now, as far as someone who I really like, I'm gonna go on a limb here, and I'm gonna say that Brad Keselowski is going to make the playoffs. We talked about it before that I thought Keselowski could do it, that he needed to win, but then he also needed some points to work out in his favor. We've talked about this ad nauseum. We get it, right? But I don't think Kurt Busch is going to make the playoffs. I don't think Christopher Bell is going to make the playoffs. And to that point, I would say it's more likely that Brad Keselowski and his teammate Chris Buescher make the playoffs because they've been incredibly consistent to this point in time. I love what Roush Fenway Keselowski Racing is doing right now. And some of these other guys who made the playoffs last year, like Kurt Busch and Christopher Bell, just are not hitting it at the right time. So, I mean, they could make the playoffs, but I don't know how quite yet. I know that Brad Keselowski needs to win, and they need the points to work out in his favor. But as it stands right now, I wouldn't be too surprised, honestly, if Brad Keselowski was to make the playoffs. As far as this week, this Sunday, Mother's Day Sunday, we have the annual throwback race at Darlington in South Carolina in the Palmetto State. Now, who do we like this week? Before we get into that, I want to talk about some really important element to this race that I always love, and I hope you'll enjoy it as well. The Throwback Themes, right? This is an annual thing that they do, and there's different, rhymes or reason they do this, but basically, great tradition. There's a ton of great throwback schemes that these cars and teams are running. I love Corey LaJoie. He's driving that pink number 777 car, honoring Marty Robbins from 1964. You don't often see 3 numbers on a car, so pretty cool to see there. William Byron, of course, he's driving the iconic Jeff Gordon, the Exalta, which I guess at that point in time was DuPont. Flames car from 2007, Flames scheme. It's one you don't forget, right? From 2007 when Jeff Gordon was on top of the world, on top of the NASCAR world. And then Kurt Busch, of course, he drives a McDonald's car on occasion. But he'll be driving the McDonald's car this Sunday in honor of Bill Elliott, the scheme that he ran in 1996. And of course, Bill Elliott will actually be in the booth on Sunday for Stage 3. So pretty cool moment there. Now, as far as guys to watch this week, Denny Hamlin, right? Average finish of 7th place in 19 races and 4 wins for Mr. Hamlin. Truex Jr., Martin Truex Jr., his average finish is 11th in 19 races with 2 wins. And Kyle Busch with an average finish of 12th in 20 races and 1 win. So as you can see, Gibbs is pretty good at this track, right? The only Gibbs driver I did not mention there was Christopher Bell, and I just told you I was not going to make the playoffs. So take that as you may. One other guy I would like to see how well he does, I just mentioned Kevin Harvick, right? At this track in 28 races, average finish of 12th, and he's won 3 times. So there is precedent to say that he could do well here. I have no reason to think he will do well here this year, but he could, and he's shown us that he has done it before. Now, who do I like this week? Well, there's one name that I did not mention that always has strong finishes at Darlington, and that man is Erik Jones, driving the 43 car. In 8 career races, he has an average finish of 10th at this track, and he's won here before. He has 1 win at this track, and has finished in the top 5 in half of his races at this track. And 4 different occasions, he's finished in the top 5. That's a pretty good reason, right? And we saw him run well at Talladega, and I would tend to think he'll run well this Sunday as well. So I will take Erik Jones to win it this Sunday at Darlington. On to story number 2. I don't know about you, but I believe in hell, which is a pretty stark thing to say to open up story number 2 in hindsight. And this is not a religious thing. I don't really want to go too far down this path, but I believe there is a hell, right? And I believe it's a real place, and I believe that we only experience it after death. I believe that it's separate from earth, right? There's earth, and then there's heaven, and then there's hell, right? Just to kind of really generally use general terms here. Don't want to get too much into the weeds of it, but there is an earth and there is an hell, right? Well, I thought that earth and hell were separate ideas. I did. I really did believe that until this past week. And you might be thinking, Shawn, it's a little bit outlandish to say, considering you just said that you believe in hell. Yeah, but I lived a hell on earth this past weekend. It's like I realized my personal hell on earth, if you will. That hell on earth came during the NFL draft. Well, I guess it was Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for that matter, where for the most part, Georgia set a draft record with 15 guys getting drafted in this year's class. And the funny thing about it was before the draft started Thursday night, I turned to my mom and I said verbatim, I said that my personal hell would be if the number 1 overall pick goes to a Georgia Bulldog. Of course, there were a couple of different options out there. There was a North Carolina State Wolfpack offensive tackle. You had Evan Neal from Alabama. You had Aiden Hutchinson from Michigan. There were a few options out there. And I said my personal hell would be that a Georgia player is selected 1st overall in the NFL draft. And then guess what happened? That was only just the beginning. I thought that was it. I was like, oh, that couldn't possibly get worse from there. No, it did get worse from there. There were 5 Georgia players drafted in the 1st round. Okay, cool. Doesn't really seem like a lot, but that's fine. But 2 of them went to my team, the Green Bay Packers. And I was like, well, this just even gets better and better, doesn't it? First, they pick a guy at 22, and then they pick another guy at 28. And I was like, wow, this is great. Last year, we picked a Georgia Bulldog in the 1st round of the NFL draft, and we're going to do it again this year. And then we're going to do it again this year. And it's remarkable, right? But again, it was the beginning of the end for me, because I did not realize that the Packers were only contributing to something that was going to set a record across the board. And in fact, they were just digging the knife a little bit deeper in my soul as a guy who doesn't really like Georgia a whole lot, right? I'll give them credit for where credit's due, but it kind of pains me to watch them do as well as they have in this situation. Now, coming in a not so second as far as draft picks, LSU had 10 guys drafted, and Alabama had 7 guys drafted as well. Some other guys who signed as undrafted free agents across the board, but 7, 10, and 15 respectively for Alabama, LSU, and Georgia. Now, obviously, Georgia won the draft by, heads and shoulders above everyone else. They won the draft, to say the least, right? But one thing I want to point out, the last time we saw a team do nearly as well as Georgia did here in the draft was LSU in I guess it was after the 2019 season, the 2019-20 season, when they had like 14 guys get drafted, right? And of course, we're all familiar what happened shortly thereafter, where they went 5-5 or 4-6 in the 2020 COVID year, and then proceeded to fire their head coach the next year, right? And not to say that there will be parallels here, right? But I would tend to say that we've seen that there is a bit of a precedent that a lot could happen in the next 24 months for the Georgia football program if Kirby Smart doesn't have it headed in the right direction. So I'll be interested to see what he does there, and hopefully this is a sign of things to come in a positive way for Georgia, but you never know how things could unfold. Who else won the draft? Well, I'd say Ole Miss. They had 6 draft picks, which is a strong class in Kiffin's second year, after wrapping up Kiffin's second year with the Rebels. A&M, they had only 4 guys drafted, but considering some of that was represented in night 1 in the 1st round, I'd say Jimbo can call that a win. Jimbo would call anything a win, but he can call that a win for his program and for the Aggies. As far as who lost the draft, well, there's one team that I'll always, when given the opportunity to, point out where they fell just a tad short. And in this case, it was the Auburn Tigers. Auburn had 1 draft pick on I think it was actually night 1. It may have been night 2. In any case, throughout all 3 days of the NFL draft, 1 draft pick, which, if Brian Harsin needed another reason to dissuade players from coming to his university, well, that's a great reason right there. Hey, you're not actually going to get drafted. So, disappointing to say the least if you're an Auburn Tiger fan, player, coach, whoever, someone who wants Brian Harsin to keep his job. Not a good performance there. Also, Missouri and Mississippi State only had 2 picks each, but I think that goes to show you that this year in particular will be a big year for them both. From a recruiting standpoint, they could have used strong draft classes this year. Of course, they didn't get them, but they could have used them, right? I think especially for Eli Drinkowitz, going into what is, I think, year 3 now for him, he needs to show up big here in year 3. I think I would tend to say that the pressure is ramping up just a little bit on Eli Drinkowitz, and even to some degree, Mike Leach. We've talked about that before, how year 3 tends to be a line of demarcation for Mike Leach-led teams. But these draft classes aren't exactly good omens for what is coming ahead. The other side of things is that this draft class was kind of weak across the board, right? This year's draft class didn't have a whole lot of talent, with a lot of talented quarterbacks or whatever else. So I wanted to look ahead to next year's draft. I want to say, like, okay, who will stand out a year from now? Well, suffice to say, the SEC is going to have a good year next year. Let's just go through a couple of the names. Will Anderson Jr. and Bryce Young and Eli Ricks and Jahmyr Gibbs and Jordan Battle for Alabama, right? Kayshon Boutte and B.J. Ojolari and Sevyn Banks, right, for LSU. You know about Jalen Carter and Keely Ringo and Nolan Smith for Georgia. And of course, Anthony Richardson. People forget about him, but Florida's quarterback could be really good this year and set himself up for a really good draft pick just a year from now. And going through, of course, there's some other great guys outside the SEC with Smith and Jigba from Ohio State and C.J. Stroud and a number of other guys. But a lot of those names I just mentioned right there, they're probably going to be top 15, top 20. And you just have to imagine that it's going to be a lot of fun next year. If we thought we had a good class this year, which we didn't have a great class, but, a class nonetheless, just imagine how much better it'll be in a year's time. So, overall, a strong NFL draft for the SEC, a strong NFL draft for the Georgia Bulldogs, much to my dismay, a strong NFL draft for a number of other teams out there. The New York Jets got some great picks. The Atlanta Falcons got some great picks. The Tennessee Titans got some great picks. With that, actually, I believe Tennessee even picked up an Arkansas player in the process. So, an overall great draft across the board for a lot of different folks, and hopefully it sets up for another great one in 2023. Speaking of, let's go to story number 3. I had not talked about the NBA playoffs too extensively to this point. In fact, I've kind of avoided it because, I mentioned it before that I hadn't watched too much college basketball this year. And I said, well, March Madness, I have no choice, right? I have to talk about college basketball during March Madness. That's only natural. And we did it. We did it pretty well. And I sat back and I said, okay, I'll watch the first round of the NBA playoffs just to get a sense as to what I'm looking at, right? And naturally, all top 8 teams won, right? 1 through 4 in both conferences won their matchups, and here they are now in the second round. Of course, we saw some games on Sunday, some more games throughout the past couple of days as well. Some pretty fun matchups. And in full disclosure, before I get too far down the rabbit hole here, I do want to make it clear, my team didn't even make the playoffs, so I have I do have bias here, but not for those particular reasons. I don't have a dog in the fight, right? I do have a dog that doesn't like some of those dogs in the fight, which will inform some of my decisions here. But overall, I don't really have a dog in the fight. I don't really have a reason. I don't have a rooting interest in a lot of this stuff. So really, I try to think this is relatively objective. Not entirely, but close, right? As it stands now, of course, we got Miami, Boston, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia in the East. In the West, we have Phoenix, Memphis, Golden State, and Dallas out on the West Coast of things. On Sunday, I saw briefly that Memphis, they got just slightly squeaked by, or Golden State squeaked by Memphis, and then, of course, Milwaukee, they topped Boston despite being short-handed. The other 2 series, they look like they'll be a lot of fun as well, but you always know the 2-3 matchups are going to be pretty good. So I imagine that the Boston-Milwaukee matchup will be pretty fun, and the Memphis-Golden State matchup will be pretty fun as well, compared to the other 2 counterparts, of course. Now, one team in particular I've had the chance to watch this year was, I went to a Miami game back in, I guess, February or so. And at that point in time, they didn't have Kyle Lowry, right? And they ended up losing to Toronto in triple overtime. And at that point, I wasn't a believer. I said, I don't really get what's so special about this team. Miami's supposed to be number 1 in their conference and in their division, but I didn't really get it, right? But I had friends who said, no, just wait, and you'll get it. And you'll understand where we are going as a team. And I said, okay, right, prove me wrong. And then I saw their defense against Atlanta in the last series, so as recently as a week ago, where they hounded Trae Young. I honestly felt bad for the Hawks point guard that night and throughout that series because they just looked awful compared to that Miami defense. They're facing off against that Miami defense, who's just so lengthy, so agile, they can go across the board pretty easily. It's pretty incredible to watch, honestly. And then, of course, plus Miami's got the sharpshooters on the outside with Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero. Oh, and by the way, Victor Oladipo, who was incredible for Indianapolis and a number of other teams, I think Houston as well. He might have been in Orlando. He's finally now found a bit of a home in Miami, and he's actually playing really well at the right time. He's overcoming his injury, so all credit to him as well. So a scary lineup for the Heat. I know Milwaukee got through Game 1 against Boston, but if anybody was to give Miami a chance or give Miami a run, I would say that Boston could do it, right? I love Jason Tatum. I think he's an incredibly gifted athlete, right? We just saw them sweep Brooklyn in the first round of the playoffs. Brooklyn, a team that's got Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and DeAndre Jordan and Blake Griffin and LaMarcus Aldridge and Patty Mills and Goran Dragic. See, there's been so many moving parts. I struggle. But what would have been basically an all-star team 6 years ago, and for the most part, it's still a pretty decent team, got swept pretty easily by the Celtics. So if anybody can do it, I think if anybody can challenge Miami's defensive length, I think Boston could, in theory, do it. As for the West, I mentioned I didn't have any bias, right? Which I don't have bias in favor of a team, but I do have bias against some teams, right? I hate just about every team that's out there in the West for different reasons, right? I'm a Spurs fan, so I can't support teams in our division. I can't support the Memphis Grizzlies, and I can't support the Dallas Mavericks, again, because they're in the Southwest Division. So as a result, it's against my being. I can't do it. And of course, Golden State, I will never forgive them for what they did in 2017 when they broke Kawhi Leonard, and then we never got him back, and that was just the end of that. Thank you, Zaza Pachulia. I very much appreciate you. And then Phoenix, of all teams, I guess I dislike them the least, but Chris Paul is just he's just not a good dude, right? Chris Paul, their point guard, just not a good guy. And he's a guy where you want to root for him, but then he acts the way he does, and you begin to realize he's just not a good dude. You see him in the State Farm commercials, you're like, oh, he's a likable guy. No, he's not a likable guy. He's a very bad dude. And as a result, I really struggle to root for him as well. So in my perfect world, I hope an East team wins it, quite honestly. And all that said, I do think that Golden State finds a way. Whether I want them to or not, I think their window's closing a little bit, if you will. It's been closing now for a while, and this could be one of their last few runs. And I think in particular, this team, with the competition they're facing, it's a pretty good matchup across the board. Of course, with Klay Thompson and Jordan Poole and Steph Curry and all those boys, Draymond Green's still there. They stand to do really well this year in the western side of things. In the East, I'm split, honestly, between Boston and Miami. I don't really know, right? I told you I really like Boston. I told you what I've seen about Miami, right? Miami's really the only team that I've watched with any degree of frequency. I've watched Miami more this year than I have my own team, because the Spurs weren't on TV anywhere because they're bad. But, nonetheless. I've only seen one of those teams in person, like I mentioned. And that night, although it was a triple overtime loss, they were very impressive. Not having Kyle Lowry, watching Jimmy Butler go for a triple-double, some guys I never heard of going out there. And also they have Dwayne Dedmon, former San Antonio Spur. I can't root against Dwayne Dedmon. I love Dwayne Dedmon. He's an incredible player. He's been bouncing around forever. I don't know how he's still in the league, but nonetheless, a great player. So, all that said, I will take Miami to come out of the East and beat Golden State in the NBA Finals. Let's go 5 games. So, if you're a Miami Heat fan, I want you to channel your inner England, because it's coming home. The NBA Finals, Larry O'Brien Trophy, is coming home. If I'm right. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but if I'm right, it's coming home. And that'll do it for today's episode. Hopefully, we made some ground today, and hopefully enjoyed a little bit of today's episode. Of course, looking ahead to Darlington this coming Sunday, I don't really expect Chase Elliott to put on a repeat performance, but I would love for it to happen. But I really do like Eric Jones to continue Chevy's recent run of success in the NASCAR Cup Series. Looking at the NFL Draft, of course, we saw that the Georgia Bulldogs did really well, right? And all credit to them, right? It made my life fall apart over a couple of days. I I was almost deteriorating from the inside, but all credit to them. Good job, Georgia. I'd like to see you do it again. And hopefully they will, right? I'd love to see continued success. I know people hate sustained excellence. I'd love to see Georgia do it. So we'll see how that unfolds, but you never know. As we saw in next year's class, they're going to do pretty well, just as well in just a few months. And of course, I believe, with my limited knowledge on the NBA right now, that the Miami Heat will win yet another Larry O'Brien trophy in the NBA Finals in just a few weeks. And I imagine we'll probably talk about the NBA Finals as we get closer to the NBA Finals. Of course, we are in the middle of the NHL playoffs right now as well, so there's a lot of different things going on, right? And we'll try to balance this as best we can, but just a reminder, there are only 3 more episodes after today of Season 2. We have an episode on March 11th, an episode on March 18th, and lastly in March. Well, I've been saying March this whole time. May 11th, May 18th, and May 25th. Those will be our last 3 episodes of Season 2, and then we'll get started a few weeks after the SEC Media Days in about mid-August or so. So, like always, I hope you enjoyed today's show, right? I hope you enjoy all of the games and storylines that will come out over the next week, and trust me, we'll be talking about that next week as well. So, as always, I appreciate you giving us your time, and I appreciate you allowing us to talk some ball with you.